Predictability is one of the most powerful yet overlooked drivers of an animal's emotional stability. If you think about how a pet experiences the world, it's not through long-term planning or abstract reasoning, it's through patterns. Their brain is constantly asking a simple question: is this environment safe and understandable? Predictable routines answer that question in a very direct way, and when the answer is yes, the nervous system shifts toward a calmer, more regulated state. At the level of brain and body, predictability reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the main triggers for stress responses. When a pet doesn't know when it will eat, when it will go outside, or when interaction will happen, stress hormones like cortisol tend to stay elevated. This doesn't always show up as obvious distress. Sometimes it appears as restlessness, excessive vocalization, hyperactivity, or even withdrawal. These behaviors are often labeled as bad or problematic, but in many cases they are simply the byproduct of a system that lacks clear structure. Feeding is one of the clearest examples. When feeding times are consistent, the animal's internal clock, its circadian and ultradian rhythms, begins to anticipate that event. You'll often see pets become calmly alert just before feeding rather than frantic or demanding. That anticipation is a sign that the brain has mapped the pattern and feels secure in it. In contrast, inconsistent feeding schedules can lead to food anxiety, where the animal becomes overly fixated or reactive around meals. The same principle applies to movement and activity. Regular walk times for dogs or consistent play windows for cats create a rhythm that the nervous system can rely on. It's not just about burning energy, it's about creating a predictable arc to the day. Activity happens, then rest follows. When that cycle is stable, pets tend to settle more easily and show fewer spikes in anxious or destructive behavior. Sleep is deeply tied to predictability as well. Animals rely on environmental cues, light, noise, human activity, to determine when it's safe to enter deeper stages of rest. If those cues are constantly shifting, sleep becomes fragmented. Over time, this can lead to a state where the pet is physically tired but mentally wired, much like sleep-deprived humans. Consistent daily rhythms help anchor their sleep patterns, allowing for more restorative rest. Even social interaction benefits from predictability. When a pet learns when attention is likely to occur, whether it's in the morning, after work, or during specific calm periods, it reduces the need to constantly seek or demand engagement. The animal doesn't have to guess or test boundaries because the pattern is already established. What's important here is not rigid perfection, but overall consistency. Life can't always run on an exact schedule, but maintaining a general rhythm is enough for the brain to detect stability. Over time, that stability becomes the foundation for better behavior, improved health, and a more relaxed, confident animal. Species-specific stimulation is about aligning activity with the natural behavioral patterns an animal's brain evolved to perform. Every species has built-in action sequences, ways of moving, exploring, and interacting with the environment that are deeply tied to reward systems in the brain. When those patterns are activated, the animal doesn't just burn energy, it experiences a kind of neurological completion that leads to calmness and satisfaction. In dogs, for example, one of the dominant drives is scent exploration. Their olfactory system is vastly more developed than ours, and a significant portion of their brain is dedicated to processing smell. When a dog is allowed to sniff during walks, it's not a distraction from exercise, it is the exercise, at least from a mental standpoint. Preventing that behavior and focusing only on physical movement often leaves the dog understimulated in a very specific way, which can show up later as restlessness or compulsive behavior. Engaging their nose through tracking games, scent trails, or even scattered food taps directly into that biological need. Cats operate on a different sequence that mirrors hunting. This typically involves detecting movement, stalking, chasing, pouncing, and then disengaging into rest. When play doesn't follow this pattern, if it's too long, too random, or lacks a clear capture moment, it can leave the cat in a state of unresolved arousal. Short, intentional bursts of play that allow the cat to complete that full cycle are far more effective. Afterward, you'll often see a natural transition into grooming or sleep, which is a sign that the nervous system has settled. Birds and small mammals often require cognitive stimulation as much as physical activity. In the wild, much of their time is spent foraging, problem-solving, and navigating complex environments. When their captive environment lacks that challenge, they can develop repetitive or self-soothing behaviors that signal understimulation. Introducing puzzles, varied textures, or opportunities to explore in controlled ways can activate those same neural pathways and improve overall well-being. A key mistake people make is assuming that more stimulation is always better. In reality, overstimulation, especially when it's loud, chaotic, or unpredictable, can push the nervous system into a heightened state that resembles stress more than enrichment. The goal isn't constant activity. It's meaningful activity that has a beginning, middle, and end. That structure allows the brain to engage fully and then disengage, which is where recovery and calmness occur. Another important aspect is timing. Delivering stimulation at appropriate points in the day, such as when the animal is naturally more alert, enhances its effectiveness. Trying to force engagement when the pet is already tired or overstimulated can have the opposite effect, leading to irritability or avoidance. When stimulation matches the animal's innate wiring, it reduces the need for the pet to create its own outlets, which is often when undesirable behaviors emerge. Chewing, scratching, digging, or excessive vocalizing can frequently be traced back to unmet behavioral needs rather than defiance. By redirecting energy into activities that the brain recognizes as meaningful, you're essentially working with the animal's biology instead of against it. True rest is one of the most underestimated components of a pet's well-being, yet it plays a central role in regulating both behavior and physiology. Many animals require significantly more sleep than humans, and not just light dozing, but deep, uninterrupted rest that allows the nervous system to fully reset. Without that, even a well-fed and well-exercised pet can become dysregulated. From a biological standpoint, sleep is when critical processes occur: memory consolidation, tissue repair, immune function, and emotional processing. If a pet is constantly being disturbed, whether by noise, light, or frequent interaction, it prevents them from entering the deeper stages of sleep that support these functions. What you often see in response is a kind of cumulative fatigue that doesn't always look like tiredness. Instead, it can show up as irritability, hyperactivity, or an inability to settle. One of the challenges is that pets will often adapt to the household environment, even if it's not ideal for rest. For example, if a dog is repeatedly interrupted while sleeping, it may start choosing lighter, more vigilant forms of rest rather than fully relaxing. This keeps the brain in a semi-alert state, where it's ready to respond at any moment. Over time, that pattern can elevate baseline stress levels and make the animal more reactive to small triggers. The environment plays a major role in supporting true rest. Quiet, low-traffic areas where the pet can retreat without being approached are critical. Constant foot traffic, loud sounds, or unpredictable disruptions can prevent the animal from ever fully letting its guard down. Even well-intentioned behaviors, like petting or talking to an animal while it's resting, can fragment sleep cycles if done frequently enough. Light exposure is another factor that often goes unnoticed. Just like humans, animals rely on light cues to regulate their circadian rhythms. Irregular lighting, such as bright artificial light late at night or constant screen exposure, can disrupt their internal clock, making it harder for them to enter consistent sleep patterns. Aligning their environment more closely with natural light-dark cycles can improve both the quality and timing of rest. There's also an important distinction between rest and inactivity. A pet lying down in a busy or stimulating environment isn't necessarily resting in a restorative way. True rest involves a shift in the nervous system toward a parasympathetic state, where heart rate slows, muscles relax, and the brain reduces its level of alertness. You can often recognize this in subtle signs like deeper breathing, relaxed posture, and reduced responsiveness to minor stimuli. Another factor is timing relative to activity. After periods of stimulation, whether physical or mental, the brain needs an opportunity to downshift. If stimulation is constant or poorly timed, the animal may never fully transition into a restful state. Creating a rhythm where activity is followed by quiet, protected downtime helps reinforce that natural cycle. When pets consistently get high-quality rest, you tend to see improvements across the board: more stable mood, better learning, reduced anxiety, and healthier physical function. It's not just about preventing problems, it's about enabling the nervous system to operate the way it's designed to, with clear transitions between engagement and recovery. Autonomy, or a sense of control over one's environment, is a fundamental biological need that extends across species. For pets, this doesn't mean complete freedom or lack of structure, but rather the presence of small, meaningful choices that allow them to influence their own experience. When an animal has some degree of control, its nervous system shifts toward a more stable and confident state. Without that control, the system can move in the opposite direction, toward anxiety, passivity, or reactivity. At the neural level, having control reduces the perception of threat. When an animal can predict not just what will happen, but also has some influence over it, stress responses are dampened. This is closely tied to the concept of learned helplessness, where repeated exposure to situations with no control leads the animal to stop trying to change outcomes altogether. In pets, this can show up as disengagement, lack of responsiveness, or a kind of flattened behavior that people sometimes mistake for calmness. In practical terms, autonomy can be introduced in very simple ways. Allowing a dog to choose the pace or direction of a walk within reasonable boundaries gives it an active role in exploration. For a cat, having access to vertical spaces or multiple resting spots allows it to decide where it feels safest or most comfortable. These choices may seem small from a human perspective, but they carry significant weight in how the animal perceives its environment. Choice also plays a role in social interaction. When a pet is able to approach or move away from contact freely, it creates a very different dynamic than when interaction is imposed. For example, a dog that can walk up to you for attention and leave when it's had enough is more likely to remain relaxed and engaged. In contrast, repeatedly initiating contact without reading the animal's signals can create subtle tension, even if the pet doesn't outwardly resist. Another area where autonomy matters is access to resources. This includes food, water, resting areas, and even sensory experiences like light and temperature. When pets can move between different environments, cooler or warmer spots, quieter or more active areas, they are effectively regulating their own internal state. Restricting that movement too much can force the animal to remain in conditions that don't align with its needs, increasing stress over time. Training can either support or undermine autonomy, depending on how it's approached. Systems that rely purely on control and correction often suppress behavior without addressing the underlying state of the animal. In contrast, training that incorporates choice, such as offering options and reinforcing voluntary engagement, tends to produce more resilient and adaptable behavior. The animal learns not just what to do, but that its actions have meaningful consequences. It's important to recognize that autonomy doesn't eliminate the need for structure. In fact, the two work together. Predictable routines create a stable framework, while autonomy allows flexibility within that framework. This balance is what enables a pet to feel both secure and capable. When animals have even a modest degree of control over their daily experience, you often see increased confidence, reduced stress behaviors, and a greater willingness to engage with their environment. Social interaction is a core need for many pets, but the way it's delivered often determines whether it regulates or stresses the animal. Humans tend to define connection in very human terms: touch, eye contact, constant engagement. But animals interpret social behavior through a different lens. What feels like affection to a person can sometimes feel overwhelming or intrusive to a pet, depending on its species, temperament, and current state. At the nervous system level, social interaction can either activate a sense of safety or trigger mild threat responses. The difference lies in predictability, consent, and timing. When a pet can anticipate interaction and has the option to engage or disengage, the experience tends to be calming. When interaction is sudden, forced, or mismatched with the animal's state, it can elevate stress, even if the pet doesn't visibly resist. One of the most important shifts is learning to recognize subtle behavioral cues. Animals communicate constantly through body language, posture, muscle tone, ear position, tail movement, and even the direction of their gaze. A relaxed animal might have loose, fluid movements and soft attention, while a more tense one may show stiffness, avoidance, or hyperfocus. Responding to these signals in real time is what makes interaction feel safe and coherent to the animal. Proximity often matters more than direct contact. Many pets are highly social but prefer to simply be near their human rather than actively engaged all the time. Sitting in the same room, moving together through space, or sharing quiet moments can provide a strong sense of connection without overstimulation. This kind of low-pressure presence allows the animal's nervous system to settle while still benefiting from social bonding. Timing also plays a critical role. Engaging with a pet when it is already calm tends to reinforce that calm state. In contrast, interacting when the animal is highly aroused, excited, anxious, or overstimulated can amplify that state rather than soothe it. For example, Excessive attention during moments of hyperactivity can inadvertently reinforce that energy pattern, making it more likely to repeat. There's also a difference between structured and unstructured interaction. Structured interaction, like training sessions or intentional play, gives the animal a clear framework and often leads to more predictable outcomes. Unstructured interaction, while still valuable, requires more sensitivity to the animal's signals to avoid crossing into overstimulation. Balancing the two creates a more stable social environment. Another factor is consistency across people. If different individuals interact with the pet in very different ways, some respecting boundaries, others ignoring them, it can create confusion and reduce the animal's sense of control. Consistent, respectful interaction patterns help the pet form clear expectations, which in turn lowers stress. Over time, when social interaction aligns with the animal's preferences and signals, it strengthens trust. The pet learns that engagement is safe, optional, and rewarding rather than something it has to tolerate. This leads to more genuine connection, where the animal actively seeks interaction instead of avoiding or enduring it. Food is often treated as a simple input, something you provide once or twice a day to meet nutritional needs. But for animals, feeding is deeply tied to behavior, brain function, and emotional state. In the wild, eating is not a passive activity. It involves searching, tracking, manipulating, and sometimes problem solving. When that entire process is reduced to a bowl placed on the floor, a large portion of the animal's natural behavioral sequence is removed. At the level of the brain, the act of working for food engages reward pathways in a much more complete way than passive consumption. Dopamine, which is associated with motivation and anticipation, is released not just when food is eaten, but during the process of obtaining it. When pets are given opportunities to engage in that process, even in simple, controlled ways, it creates a more satisfying and regulating experience. The animal doesn't just feel full, it feels behaviorally fulfilled. For dogs, this can include scattering food across a space, using puzzle feeders, or creating simple scent-based games where they have to locate their meal. These activities tap into their natural foraging and tracking instincts. Instead of consuming food in a few seconds, the feeding process becomes extended, engaging both mind and body. This often leads to a calmer state afterward, as the behavioral loop has been completed. Cats benefit from a slightly different approach that mirrors hunting. Small portions of food delivered through interactive toys or hidden in different locations can simulate the sequence of searching and capturing. This aligns feeding with their natural rhythm of short, intense bursts of activity followed by rest. When this pattern is supported, it can reduce behaviors like overeating, nighttime restlessness, or attention-seeking. Timing also plays a role in how food affects the nervous system. Feeding immediately after appropriate activity, like a walk for a dog or play for a cat, can reinforce a natural cycle: exertion followed by reward and then rest. This sequence helps the brain transition into a more relaxed state. Feeding without that preceding activity can still meet nutritional needs, but it may not provide the same level of behavioral satisfaction. The sensory experience of eating matters as well. Texture, smell, and the act of chewing all contribute to how the brain processes the meal. Foods or feeding methods that encourage chewing or manipulation can have a calming effect, as they engage repetitive motor patterns that are inherently soothing to the nervous system. Another important aspect is pacing. Rapid consumption, which is common when food is freely available in a bowl, can bypass many of the regulatory processes tied to feeding. Slowing the process down through puzzles, distribution, or portioning allows the body and brain to stay engaged longer, leading to better satiety signals and reduced fixation on food. When feeding becomes an active process rather than a passive one, it shifts the role of food from mere sustenance to enrichment. This doesn't require complex tools or constant effort. Small adjustments can have a significant impact. By aligning feeding with natural instincts and behavioral sequences, you create a more balanced, satisfied animal that is less likely to seek out alternative, often problematic, outlets for its energy. When feeding is approached this way, it becomes more than a routine task. It becomes a daily opportunity to support your pet's mental and emotional balance. By integrating small challenges, aligning meals with natural activity patterns, and engaging their senses, you're reinforcing the way their brain is designed to function. Over time, this leads to a pet that is not only physically nourished, but also calmer, more focused, and less driven to express unmet needs through unwanted behaviors.